سيدة نساء العالمين ليدي فاطمة صلوات الله وسلامه عليها أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس everyone together. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانئا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فاتح من البلايا قنته وكم من إعفار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من فناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وكعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة الشهوات وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاءك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتبرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شدي وفاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي تسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة ما هكذا الذل بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم. يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكفوه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته. فكيف احتمال لبلاء الآخرة وجليل الوقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي. فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته. فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك. أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجاي عفو، فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج العاملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وشريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي، فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات؟ ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماء أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك كنت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي
فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة raise your hands in دعاء أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمت يا الله وكل ذنب أذنبت وكل قبيح أسررت وكل جهل عملت كتمته أو أعلنت أخفيته أو أظهرت وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك خفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشر أو رزق تبسط أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر يا ربي يا ربي يا رب everyone together يا ربي if you wish for your sins to be forgiven on this night يا ربي يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا يا الله يا ربي قوم على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على عزيمة جوانحي وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في المبادرين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجدني بجودك، واعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقل لي عثرتي، واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي، يا سريع الرضا. No matter what we've done, inshallah, through this line in Dua-E-Kumayl, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to have His pleasure on us quickly achieved. So regardless of what we've done on this night, we call out this, and inshallah at speed He will be pleased with us again. Ya Allah. Ya Sari'a Rida, Ya Sari'a Rida, اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء، وذكره شفاء، وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء، وسلاحه البكاء، يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله، وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. اللهم صل على محمد. نقرأ سورة الفاتحة.
Take a small 5-minute break, and then we'll be back for the discussion circle at about 8:15. So, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين، حبيب إله العالمين، أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين المظلومين، واللعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. وصلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's a nice surprise. How's it going? Good to see you. It's very informal, don't worry. I get to embarrass you now. I've got something to pick on. A pleasure to see you again, dear brothers and sisters. Session number 6, you've all made it, and I'm surprised actually, given how close we are to the bank holiday time. I thought a lot of you would take time off, because I was certainly thinking about it as well. So alhamdulillah, good to see you all, and I hope that you found last week's session a useful conclusion to our first usul in Tawheed. It was quite a reflective session, one that I said that if you manage to get over that bridge of understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not limited, rather He is infinite, and if you're able to jump over that fence, then you'll start to see the world in a very different way. You'll start to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a very different light, such that when you do face calamities, you now feel that you're connected to the infinite. And when you're connected to a source of infinite power, you know that nothing, no matter how great that tribulation is, will affect you. You'll be able to get through it, and you'll be able to conclude with مَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا, no matter whatever you say. So that concluded our initial discussion into Tawheed, which then leaves us, inshallah, to the second of our usul, into the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, into adal. And we're going to, inshallah, depending on time, depending on how awake I am and you are all, we are all together, we're going to try and get through 2 of Ayatul al-Nasr's sessions on this, because I think the first one will probably leave a few cliffhangers, and I don't want you guys to go away with too many of those, because it can cause a bit of confusion. So depending on your energy that you give back, we'll be able to guess if we can get into the second session. But just as an introduction, we're going to start with the following. We know that adala, the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is part of our usul. We know it's the second usul that at least those from the Shia Ithna Ashari school of thought believe to be the second of the, what we say, 5 usul. But we want to ask the question, why? Rather than just lip service, Tawheed, Adala, Nubuwwah, Imam al-Qiyam, we want to understand why. The same way as we understood and derived from first principles, why Tawheed is an usul, why Tawheed is necessary, why theism is valuable, etc. We now want to do the same. Rather than just assume that Adala comes from nowhere, we want to say, let's justify it. We're going to do it in 2 ways. The first is that we're going to understand why is it that in the usul, we mention the Adala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala above and beyond any other attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is it Adala rather than His Rahmah? Why is it Adala rather than His forgiveness? And interestingly, what we see today with a lot of new school of thought coming in, that kind of appeases the Western Shias like mindset, is that we need to have a very loving and a very merciful and a very caring and caressing Lord. Now we're not denying that. But in seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as only loving, merciful and kind, suddenly you don't feel like you need to obey Him. It makes you feel like you can get away with murder. We see this a lot with mothers, right? Poor mothers get criticized no matter how they mother. On the one hand, if you're too harsh with your child, people are like, oh, you're wicked, you're terrible, you're a terrible mother. On the other hand, if you're too chilled with your child, they're like, oh, they let him run around the mosque and, you know, like Hussain was here the other day and kind of caused havoc for you also. I apologize again for that. No matter what you do as a mother, everyone says you're doing it wrong. With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everyone says, oh, we want Him to be loving, we want Him to be merciful, we want this, we want that, we want that. Hold on, it's not about what you want. It's about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And the part that we usually forget with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nowadays is His adala, is His justice. And just as something to keep in your mind, there's a reason why we say, oh Allah, please judge us with your mercy, not with your adala. Because His justice is so true, is so perfect, is so fair, that we'll never ever ever be able to, well, theoretically, or practically maybe, but theoretically we could,
practically will never be able to live up to appease the true justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because with the very breath that I just used, I was not thanking him. And therefore I've done him a disservice, given how just and fair he is. He's saying, I've given you another heartbeat, I've given you another breath, I've given you limbs, I've given you this. And you didn't spend it thanking me, you didn't spend it serving me, you didn't spend it serving the community. For each of those moments, what more did you want from me in that time? The adala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is critical. And we're going to try and understand why is it adala rather than his rahmah that we emphasize in the usul. And interestingly then, just to attach that, why is it that new schools of thought within Shi'ism are forgetting his adala very, very quickly? Just focus on his love and his mercy. What about his adala? It's in the usul. Rahmah is not there. So that's what we're going to try and figure out. And secondly, we'll then be able to answer the question, why is it therefore selected as one of the 5 usul that we have? So inshallah, if you are with me, and if you can give me a little bit of your energy, I'll be very, very grateful. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So why is the adala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the usul? If we start with this definition, adala, justice. What is justice? Justice in its widest meaning means to put every item into its proper position. So if you have a book and it's on the floor, but you've got a bookshelf behind you, you are not being adil, you are not being just towards that book. You are not putting that book in its rightful position. Interestingly, we hear the word dhulm being used a lot in opposition to adala, which we usually define as oppression. The dhulm on Al Muhammad, the oppression on Al Muhammad. Dhulm, if you take the inverse of adala, means if you have something and you don't put it in its rightful position. So when we say that the second so-called caliph, for example, and the first so-called caliph of Islam, that they did dhulm on Al Muhammad, it wasn't that they went around hitting Al Muhammad. Yes, this is incorrect, I'm not denying that. But what is the actual dhulm that hurts the heart of the Shia the most? And that hurt them the most? It wasn't the lashes, it wasn't the whips, it wasn't the swords, it wasn't the beating, no. That, fine, physically hurt. What was the true dhulm? What was the true oppression? It's that you had Al Muhammad, who are the guardians of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth, Hujjatullah fil ardh. Yet these individuals do not place them into that role in the materialistic realm. They usurped it from them. That is the dhulm. They took Ahlul Bayt away from where they should have been, in their improper place. They didn't put the book on the shelf. They didn't recognize Al Muhammad as the leaders of the ummah on this earth. That is the dhulm. So in the opposition to adala, it's putting something in its place. So why is it that this adala is there instead of any of the other traits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you look at his rahmah, his mercy, his kindness, his compassion, whatever you want to translate it as, needs to be used in the right time, in the right moment. So it requires adal. It requires Allah to be adil. For Allah to be forgiving, Allah needs to be forgiving in the right time, in the right moment, when He decrees the right time to be the case. It can't just be, for example, that I've gone out, had a pint of beer, and then I'm like, Ya Allah, forgive me. It would be wrong, it would be unwise for me to be forgiven in a click of a finger, right? I need to feel remorseful, I need to feel regretful, I need to have nida. I need to recognize what I've done. And in that moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through His justice, will say, now is the right time to forgive him. Do we see the correlation there? And this is one of those where I need you guys to nod with me, if it makes sense. Why the adal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so necessary for any of the other traits. With each other? Inshallah. Okay, cool. In addition, the other usul, nubuwa, imama, and qiyamah, also all depend on adal. And we'll discuss this in a second in terms of the difference between Ahl Sunnah and Tashayyu, in terms of where we differ with some of the schools of thought. But whenever you hear the concept of imamah being mentioned, you'll always hear it addressed with adal. Because to logically prove imamah and even nubuwah, we need adala, we need the justice of Allah, we need the fairness of Allah. And therefore, not only is it for Allah to manifest His other traits, but it's also because the other usul depend on it. And this is why adala, from nowhere, if you like, becomes such a central point in our usul. So let's try and use this practically. I've given kind of a bit of the theory and the principle, let's try and get it a bit more practical. The Ash'arite school of thought, who are a school of thought, a denomination within the Ahl Sunnah, they deny adala. So we're going to now look at why they deny adala and the impact of them denying adala. Because by doing so, we'll see how necessary it is for our madhab and for our theory as to how the world works to be true. So the Ash'arites, they deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's adala completely. Why? Their claim is that the issue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice is completely irrelevant, and that all existence is in His possession and it belongs to Him. Whatever He does is absolute justice. They don't believe in the concept of rational goodness and unseemliness, i.e. a lack of grace. They don't believe in that. They don't feel that you need to differentiate between goodness and not so goodness, if you like, a lack of grace, unseemliness, but no one uses that word, I don't think, so let's call it a lack of grace. They claim that our wisdom, as you and I, is unable to distinguish between good or bad on its own. We're not able to do this. Therefore, adalah is not necessary. So because they're unable to, they believe, differentiate between goodness and not so goodness, unseemliness, which is the difference between adalah. Either I put the book on the shelf, that's good, or I leave it on the floor, that's bad. Because they claim our wisdom can't fathom what is good versus what is not so good, they say we don't need adalah. It's not a thing. Whereas the Mu'tazilites and the Ahl Shia believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's adalah. We say and we claim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never ever engages in tyranny. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, given His adalah, will never engage in tyranny. Does that all make sense for everyone? That He wouldn't engage? Allah would not act like Saddam, for example. He's not going to engage in tyranny. So we say, no, we can recognize that this is wrong and this is right. This is fair and this is not fair. This is justice, this is not justice. The second group, i.e. the Tashayyu', us, became known as the Adliya, those who acknowledge Adalah within our creed. And we go on to use Adalah as a proof for Imam. Like I said, this is going to be a very theoretical discussion, which is why I'm saying the first half is going to be very theoretical, very principles focused, and you're like, this made no sense. It's going to leave a load of cliffhangers. So if we can get to the practical part, it's even better. So I'll be clear. Please put your hands up if anyone's like, what on earth is he on about? Just please, yes.
Question.
Please.
What is Mutazila? What are they Shias? Mutazila?
They're Ahl Sunnah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So even with the Ahl Sunnah, you have a differences basically. Does anyone have any I didn't get that? And just be honest, I'm happy to repeat this like last time, especially these first principles, they're really important to get to the bottom of. Usually the silence means one of two things. So I'm nervous. Anyway, we'll see, inshallah. If it doesn't make sense, then just shout. So, just to reiterate, we believe Adalah, putting something in its rightful place, and we say we believe it's correct because we can decipher between what is good and what is bad, and we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to engage in something that is wrong, something that is unjust. The other school of thought say, no, Adalah is not necessary because we don't have the wisdom to differentiate between what is good and what is not so good. What is Allah's justice versus what is not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice. And that's where the difference comes. We're going to continue down this track a little bit and then we're going to bring it back to see what impact this has. In faith, our secondary principles are always a reflection on the fundamental principles. I probably lost everyone there. Okay, cool. So even within our usul, we have primary principles and then secondary principles. Tawheed is necessary, hence why we discussed it first up and why we said it's so important. Without Tawheed, Qiyamah doesn't make sense. Without Tawheed, Nubuwwah doesn't make sense. Without Tawheed, whose justice are you talking about? So we have to establish Tawheed as a very first principle. Similarly, Adalah is a very, very first principle as well, because we have, as we said, Nubuwwah and Imamah and Qiyamah all depend on the Adalah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence why we're just trying to say this is a very, very central point to us. It's a very central difference between our school of thought and the other school of thought. And this isn't to say who's right, who's wrong. We obviously believe this logically makes sense. We're just trying to illustrate the differences that exist so we can appreciate them. Why? Adalah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice, has a huge impact on human society. A huge impact. And by adopting Adalah as a fundamental principle of faith, it means that we're reviving justice within human societies. If you imagine that we didn't have a concept of Adalah, of fairness, of putting things in its rightful place, we could take an individual praying in a different way to us. The right thing would be to speak to him, to guide him. The unjust thing would be to kill him. Without being adil, without fairness, without being taught what fairness looks like, chaos ensues, completely ensues. It encourages suddenly, without it, the struggle. It encourages injustice. It encourages aggression and oppression. And therefore, because of the adala of Allah, because there's this fairness, because there's this concept of, no, everything has its rightful place. The book goes on the shelf. The person praying who's doing it incorrectly gets spoken to in a certain way. The so-and-so needs to be treated in this way. The plants need to be treated that way. Because we can understand that there is a difference between what is the right way, what is the fair way, what is the just way versus what is the not the just way. Because we can differentiate that, we then have leaders like the Ai-Imma and like the Anbiya that come and guide us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice. They come and say, hey society, listen up. We know you're going to have differences, but we're going to guide you based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's adala. Not based on some random man-made corrupt rule, where no matter who gets in charge, you have a Donald Trump who makes his own rules as he goes, Saddam makes his own rules as he goes, Hitler makes his own rules as he goes. That's a lack of adala. We, as humans, all of us look at those individuals and we're like, yeah, we can see the difference between fairness and not so fairness. So this other claim that no, the human mind, the wisdom, it doesn't dictate, we're not able to figure out. No, we can tell what is good and what is right. And if we say that we can't figure out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice, then we're going to have chaos everywhere. We need to know what is right, what is wrong. And alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, look, I'm going to give you the Anbiya, I'm going to give you the Ai-Imma, and they're going to guide you towards what is right. يدعون إلى الخير يدعون إلى الخير وينهون عن المنكر. They're going to call on towards goodness and forbid that which is evil. On which premise? If there's no adala, then what on premise? What premise do you have that is good and what do you have that is bad? There's no scale, there's no justice. You don't know that the book should go on the shelf. No one taught you. Thus, adala governs all human societies. It's an indication of the need for justice within human civilization. It helps us realize what is right and what is wrong. And the great world of creation is based on this adala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so is human society. Now, just to step back to what we discussed in creation, just so you can start to get a bit of a flavor for this practical side of it, which we'll come on to in a moment. We spoke, if you remember, during our series on Tawheed, that if you have the plant, in order for a plant to grow, it needs water, it needs soil, it needs sunlight, it needs all this good stuff. That is Allah's adala, giving this plant the opportunity to grow. We know that's fair, we know that's right. If for all of the plants, Allah was like, yeah, forget it, no sun, no water, no soil, and 900 degrees, it's not very fair. So we can actually differentiate between Allah's adala and the lack of adala. And the same is for us, the same is for societies, for us to flourish. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is right for us and what is wrong for us. And therefore He sends guides to say, establish what is right and forbid that which is wrong, so that this society can prosper, so that we can get where we need to go. If you're with me so far, أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. In like a decibel meter, because then if it's like lower than the original salawat, then I know like we're struggling a little bit. You know? I know this one's gonna be a little bit. Tawheed was like a very nice, reflective, and nicey journey. This one's getting into a little bit of the meat of it, right? So, again, please stop me as you have done in the past. Please stop me if you find this a bit tricky to follow. Let's take another step back. So we're going to go in, come back, and now we're coming back out again. If we just try and look at the meaning of justice, this may start to click a few of the cogs in our head. There's two meanings, I guess you could say. In its wider sense, it's putting everything in its proper position, which I've been alluding to so far. It's to be in equilibrium. It's applicable to everything that we discussed in the last few weeks about there being order in the world, that the galaxies work in sync, the planets work in sync, the stars work in sync, all the forces work in sync. If one of those forces were to go a little bit weird, collapse. God knows what will happen. Maybe like the third Big Bang or the fourth Big Bang. I don't know how many we've had right now, right? The other meaning is considering other people's rights. So you can see the correlation between what we've been discussing. It's unjust to deprive others of their rights or engage in discrimination or favoritism. That's also justice. If we weren't to do that, then we're being unjust. The implication is this, that God does not deprive anyone of their rights. Nor does He engage in favoritism. Nor does He engage in discrimination. He's truly just. And we're going to look at proofs, inshallah, in the coming weeks. But you can see this concept of discrimination and favoritism. It's not like He gives something to one plant and not to the other. It's this fairness that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether it means the deprivation of rights or engaging in favoritism or discrimination, it's not in harmony with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes. That would go against it. For example, God will never punish a righteous person. Someone that spends their nights in ibadah, someone who gives, someone who abides by the sharia sincerely as a muttaqi. It would be against the adalah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish that person, right? So we can differentiate between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's adalah and the lack of. So we're able to see this. Neither does he encourage or praise or elevate a wrongdoer in his vicious acts. Otherwise, again, we'd be in a bit of a weird world. What we're trying to prove here is the necessity of adalah in order to link with tawheed. And he doesn't punish anyone for the wrong actions committed by others. Again, that would be against the adalah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It would be unfair. All of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions are based on complete justice. Therefore, God uses adalah. He uses justice with all members of society under all circumstances, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you are. So this Asharite claim that we mentioned at the beginning is therefore false, because when they declare that God is just, even if he just sends all the prophets to hell, or even if he dispatches all the wrongdoers and criminals to paradise, and they say, no, we can't differentiate. No, we know, the human mind can comprehend. If you send, وَلَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi to hell, something has gone wrong. We can differentiate between what looks and perceives to be right and what looks and perceives to be wrong. We can. There's a big difference between justice and injustice. So common sense wouldn't let us go towards this claim that adalah does not exist. Yes?
This might be really simplistic, but when you're talking about people being just, who wouldn't encourage someone who's doing something wrong, or who wouldn't punish someone who's doing something really right, are you just talking about in the afterlife? Because obviously in this world, there's many cases of people being treated really unfairly, no matter how just and right they are. Unfortunately, justice doesn't always prevail in this world. So is that purely the afterlife?
Sure. That's a really interesting question. Depending on how interested you are in the topic, I'd recommend a book by Sayyid Fadl Milani, Ayatollah Sayyid Fadl Milani, called Fruit of Contemplation. It's a compilation of a series of lectures that he gave during Shahr Ramadan a few years ago, within which he discusses good and evil and the origination of evil. We'll touch on it if we get to the end of this one, maybe today, but that goes into a lot more detail. Where does evil come from? Because sometimes the way we describe injustice and the origination of that injustice is not actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's, for example, the unfair distribution of wealth amongst man. There is enough there, but man hasn't distributed, and there's a load of other things as well. So it's certainly linked to this, and maybe we'll come on to it, but I think for a more analytical discourse, I'd recommend that as a way. Sure. So now we've put to bed, and just a quick show of hands, and be honest. Hands up if you're clear on why negating adalah and not including adalah. Let me get the question clear so you can actually put your hands up to this. Stick your hand up if it's clear as to why we reject that adalah shouldn't be part of the usul. Yeah? So the Asharites that come forward and say, we don't need adalah, hands up if you think, yeah, that's nonsense, we definitely need it. Yeah? We're all clear. Okay, so without the adalah of Allah, we're in a pretty weird position. To me, it's a very weird faith, or anything's right all of a sudden, right? You've got no... When someone says call on to goodness and to what is right, you actually don't know what is right, which in a weird way. So...
There's another book, Divine Justice. Ayatollah Mutahari, I believe.
Okay, Shaheed Mutahari.
Yeah.
What's it called? Divine Justice?
Divine Justice.
Amazing.
It's about 45 or maybe less than 100 pages.
Amazing.
It is a very nice book. It's regarding how Allah's justice and things, why oppression is there and this and that. So
Beautiful.
It's about less than 100 pages if people are interested in that book.
Beautiful. Divine Justice by Shaheed Mutahari. Amazing. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on a little bit now to another point. And this is where we try and look at this difference between justice and equality. Justice and equality. I know we're jumping a bit. We're trying to set a theoretical premise for our discussions to come. Sometimes, incorrectly, very incorrectly, people mix up the concepts of justice and equality. And we usually hear it today, oh, that's not fair. justice, fairness, equality, kind of all mixed up. There's a big, big, big difference we need to look at here between justice and equality. Equality is not a precondition for justice to occur. I'll repeat this. Equality is not a precondition for justice to occur. Why? Because priorities and preferences should be considered. What does that mean? Equality would mean you give me the same dinner that my son Hussein had today. That's equality, right? My wife gave him like this much bread, maybe like some carrots, I don't know, something random, and that's good for him. As a baby who's 1 year old, that's good for his stomach, which is this big. You give that to me, yes, it's equal, but is it justice? No, because I'm fat. I need to eat more, right? In the same way, you don't give the heart of a sparrow to a whale. It's equality. You've given the very same heart. But the heart of a sparrow is tiny. I'm assuming anyway, I've not actually seen a heart of a sparrow. And I assume the heart of a whale is massive, right? It needs to be huge to pump the blood around how big that thing is. So equality does not equate to justice. There's a big difference. And I don't know if you guys have seen on Facebook, there's usually this picture that goes around where you've got two people trying to look over a fence, and they say this is equality, and you've got a really short guy, and they've given him 3 like steps, and they've got a really tall guy, and they give him 3 steps. The short guy still can't look over the fence, but the tall guy is able to look over. But they've got the same thing. It's equal. No, that's not justice, though. Justice would be that both can see. The value is created. Why do we talk about this? And this alludes to the sister's question that was just asked there earlier. We need to be very careful when we talk about the adala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we don't jump to incorrect conclusions about His justice. Because the way that we understand it sometimes is incorrect, and that's why we have to be very careful. Why did Allah give him £5 and then not give him £5? That's not equal. What we've just now described. It's not about equality, it's about justice. So we need to be very careful with the parlance of this conversation. This is going to be a very limited view. I think I'll definitely take our dear uncle's recommendation on reading about Adala as much as it hangs over it. It can be quite a hefty and complicated topic. But hopefully now we're going to get a bit practical, right? So, inshallah, if you're with me, أفرح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. So, we realize Adala is necessary. We realize it's not equality. We realize that Adala is this concept of putting things in its rightful place, not discriminating between people, so on and so forth. Cool. Theoretically, we're clear. Now we go a little bit practical. Rational goodness and unseemliness, 2 opposite things. Rational goodness, yes, sending the Prophet to heaven makes sense. Unseemliness, sending the Prophet to hell would be weird. We get that, right? We can differentiate between that. Rational goodness and unseemliness, lack of grace, lack of fairness. Wisdom's able to differentiate this to a certain degree. And this is why when the sister asked about evil, we have to say to a certain degree, because sometimes we're not able to fathom it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice is so great, it's infinite, it's so complex, that sometimes we can't differentiate between, and that's fine. We know that justice and kindness are good, and they're admirable characteristics. And we know that, for example, injustice and jealousy are bad, they're repulsive, so we can see the polar opposite. And we know this without any religious instruction whatsoever. Every human on the planet with a sane brain is going to differentiate between right and wrong in that respect. However, there are things that we can't understand through the sciences alone, and it needs more. It needs guidance. It needs guidance of those who have the perfect intellect as decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To recognize what is haqq and what is batil in very difficult situations, what is fair and what is wrong. We need guides. We need the Anbiya. We need the Imam alayhim as-salam. And therefore, the Asharites, when they continue with that claim saying Adala is not there, it's like, no, you need to move on. But you can see now why they don't see the need for an Imam and that anyone can be elected. That's why it's so important for us to realize why we deny their claim that Adala is not necessary, because we fundamentally say it's necessary because that's a proof for Imamah and the prophethood.
What are these schools that you're mentioning? So there's fiqh schools like Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi. What are these schools that you're mentioning? What would they come under?
It's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think there may be some correlation, but I know what I have heard is that I've not looked into it a lot myself. Within the Ahl Sunnah, you've got so many differentiations on worldview and fiqh and like even historically as well. So you can have people of different combinations, which makes it all weird and wonderful. Again, the lack of a guide, that's where you end up, right? If we were unable to decipher between goodness and unseemliness, between what we know is kind of looks right and between what we think is wrong, how would we know whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, gave the honor of being able to do miracles to a prophet or to a liar? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the honor of miracles to specific people, right? For example, the Anbiya, some of the Anbiya. We'd imagine that he gives this honor to someone who is honorable, who is a muttaqi, who is trustworthy. We're able to differentiate that goes to someone trustworthy rather than a liar. Again, we're just trying to finish off this argument that we are able to differentiate between them. As a result of that, we can now trust religion's commands. So when the Imam comes and says, hey Sadiq, this is adl, this is just, this is not. If it may not make sense to me initially, I submit, because I know that my Creator only acts in a fair way. This very question that was asked then about evil, when you lose that concept of adala, when you've not derived it from first principles, as we've spent time just now, and as your brains have tried to be racking through it for the last few minutes, if you don't have that, then when you see someone suffering in the world, what happens? This isn't fair. This is evil. But if you recognize, no, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is adil, therefore there must be something behind this that I'm not understanding. Do you see the difference? So we have to invest in the understanding up front to establish once and for all, no doubt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is adil. Therefore, anything I see in the world, if I don't immediately recognize and say, oh, that looks like it's fair, oh, that actually looks like it's unfair, hold on, there's a guide to instruct you what is adil and what is not. So I don't fall into the dangerous trap that we've seen this new movement come into, which is look at the injustice across the world, look at how unfair it is, how could a fair creator do such an unfair thing? And then they go, well, there wasn't a fair creator anyway, because we don't have Adala within our sword, and we just have his oneness. So. Do you see how dangerous that is, and how quick people are leaving the faith with this atheism argument that's being hit with us left, right, and centre? That's why I'm taking a bit of time to focus on these principles. So now we can trust wholehearted God.
Sorry, what would be a good analogy or a good way of thinking if you did see injustice then?
We're going to mention that in...
Bismillah, sorry.
No, not at all. I'm glad you asked. It means you're with us, so I'm very, very happy. We'll mention it, inshallah. Yes, we'll get through it. We'll get to it in the end. We'll use the example of someone who takes drugs, just to give you the heads up. So that's coming. So therefore, what is the source of this injustice? If it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deliberately limiting someone from food, then where is this source of injustice? Because we'd be naive to say, no, there isn't any injustice in the world. No, there is injustice in the world. The question is, where does it arise from? What's the original cause of it? So Ayatollah Nasr puts down a few different reasons or causes of injustice that can come about in the world. The first of which, and I'm sure it would be fair to say these aren't limited, I think they're generally like cancers of the soul, but I don't want to speak on his behalf, so that would be my understanding that these aren't limited to these, but these are a good summary. The first being ignorance, that you have, for example, a cruel person or a tyrant not actually know what they're doing is actually causing people to suffer. If you said, for argument's sake, that Boris Johnson didn't realise how useless his policies were, and he actually thought genuinely, sorry if there's any Tories in the room, if there are, let's talk after. So with Boris Johnson, like, let's say for argument's sake, he didn't realise that he's just butchering very, very poor families, unfortunately, at the moment. Maybe he just doesn't know. So it could just be ignorance, right? Unfortunate, but it's the case. The second could be through need. That sometimes through jealousy, we want to possess something that someone else has. So all of a sudden, injustice comes from there. I want that power that he had. I want to be the most powerful person in the world, so on and so forth. And that can push us towards injustice within the world. And you can see how, from those who are in very powerful positions, how quickly someone's individual vendetta can cause craziness within the economy and within the global economy. Cough, Donald Trump. The third, how relevant, incompetence and inability. You may not be willing to deprive others of their rights, but we can't help it, and unwittingly we get involved in injustice. It just happens by accident. We just haven't got the means to provide for everyone. It just happens to be the case. So we have the incompetence and the inability to do so. Selfishness or revenge, I think you can kind of see the general themes, I won't go through it. So when we see that these are therefore sources of injustice, again, our first principle told us, we have an unlimited, infinite Lord who is adil. We can recognize that he's adil. We've proven that he's adil, we're good. Now, therefore, we're saying injustice comes from us, from the creation, from individuals, through these kind of vices and traits. So how does God fit in here? God has none of these defects. That's very clear to us from our first principles. Why? He's all-knowing. He doesn't need to know more. He's not going to get jealous of how much you know. He's the sustainer. He doesn't need that money that you and I need. He provides it. God is infinite. He's not worried about him dying one day and needing to have a huge empire that he lives on. God is all-powerful. He's all-present. He's everywhere. He doesn't need this ego trip that you have my picture on the wall wherever you go. No, he doesn't need that. Allah doesn't have these traits that allows him to want to be unjust to the people. He doesn't have those traits. And therefore it doesn't originate from him. It's irrational to think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could ever get involved in tyranny or injustice. He's infinite. He's perfect. He has no limits. Exactly as we mentioned last week. And that's why I said last week's session was so critical, because if you manage to jump over that fence into this unlimited, infinite, perfect, hopefully now you're nodding away like, yeah, that is the Lord. If you didn't manage that jump, you may still be in that side of like, really? And it's not okay, because we want to get to the right place, but it's understandable and we should discuss it more together. So if that is the case, please do reach out and we can discuss it more. Because if we jump over that fence and get to this infinite, invincible, perfect God, we don't have now these doubts of, yeah, but he's still... No, that's not the case. So if you haven't managed to do that jump, please reach out and I'm happy to discuss it with you. We only therefore expect what? Benevolence, justice, kindness, affection, love, mercy from a source of divine mercy. That's all we expect. So now when we think of, for example, where injustice or, maybe not injustice is the right word. Let me think about it this way. It's to your point as to like, how do we have this rebuttal? When we see something that maybe to us initially on the face of it looks unfair, and we may fall into the trap of blaming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, how do we resolve this equation? If you take the general concept of evildoers, for example, being punished, we would say it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's punishing them. It's something that we're not actually used to, right? Usually, what do we hear in terms of our general parlance within the mosque when we're getting brought up? If you don't pray, who's going to punish you? Allah's going to punish you. So we kind of, in our own parlance within the community, with our upbringing, have kind of put ourselves in this weird position that we now believe Allah is going around with a whip and punishing you. Right? And I'm going to be very subtle with the wording here is very nuanced, so I don't want you to think that, for example, there isn't punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the subtlety is here. It's not God who's punishing them. If I didn't pray, it's not God who's punishing me. Rather, the punishment is in fact the consequence of me not praying. See the difference? It's similar to the punishment of death, which an addict receives because of his addiction and due to his use. The individual can't say, it was the drug that killed me. No, the drug can exist and you can exist and you don't get killed by the drug. It's you and your addiction that killed you. That's the punishment. Don't point to the other thing. It's not Allah that is punishing me. It is the consequence of me not praying. It is the consequence of me drinking. It's the consequence of me lying. It's the consequence of me dressing in a certain way. It's the consequence of me speaking to people in a certain way. Of stealing. The consequence of that is the punishment. Allah is all just. You made the decision not to or to do something, and therefore you are deserving of punishment. You are the cause of the need for the punishment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Surah Al-Naml, Surah number 27, verse number 9, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. هَلْ تُجْزَوْنَ إِلَّا مَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. That shall you be rewarded for anything except what you did.
Say that again, please.
Shall you be rewarded for anything except what you did? Again, we'll go into a few more of these lines of Quran. You can start to see this come out a little bit more. So this concept of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, justice and fairness, comes up so much in the Quran, so much. And it's actually quite interesting when you think and just reflect for a moment, like, why is it that it's constantly repeating? What's the big deal? I mentioned in a lecture the other day, if I remember the numbers correctly, again, this is from Sayyid Father Milani's book, that the patience is mentioned over 50 times in the Quran. 50 times. And I was saying, like, if you take the average Quran, it's what, 500-600 pages, right? 1 in every 10 pages, theoretically, you have Allah reminding you about patience. Could have been so many other things, but it's patience constantly ringing. And the patient ones in this group is mentioned over 20 times. Similarly here, we see the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reiterated so much. Why? I don't know. And that's where our minds can wonder, right? Maybe it's because we see so much injustice in the world that we start to connect this horrible dots to be like, that injustice comes from Allah. He's like, no. Remember, Allah is just. Remember the principle. Allah is just. Adala, 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 adala. You now need to figure out where this injustice has come from, because you know that this is perfect and everlasting and fully just. For example, Surah number 10, verse 44, Surah Yunus. Inna Allah la yavlimu an-nas shay'an walakin an-nasa anfusahum yavlimun. Indeed, Allah does not wrong the people at all, but it's the people who are wronging themselves. Indeed, Allah does not wrong the people at all, but it's the people who are wronging themselves. We emphasized yesterday in Dua-E-Kumayl, ظَلَمْتُ نَفْسِي. I have done dhulm on myself. I have wronged myself. ظَلَمْتُ نَفْسِي. I don't blame anything else. It's myself. I make those decisions. No one else. Allah doesn't force me to drink that drink, or to say that thing, or to not wear, or to wear this thing. No, it's me. It's fully me. I have to hold my hands up. I am the originator for the need of this punishment that I will then receive for it. Because Allah is perfectly just. If I don't do that, and if I avoid that sin, guess what? Allah doesn't have this need, but I'm still going to do him over anyway. No, it's not his goal in life, right, or in his existence. No, he wants to give me mercy. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. But I can't call for his mercy and his love if in the background I'm like, well, I mean, I can, but whether Allah gives it to me, I don't know. But do you see the difference here? Now we're starting to let this concept click in our head. It comes from me. وَلَكِنَّ النَّاسَ أَنفُسَهُمْ يَظْلِمُونَ. Allah does not wrong the people at all, but it's the people who are wronging themselves. Surah An-Nisa, verse 40. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَظْلِمُ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ. Indeed, Allah does not do injustice even as much as an atom's weight. Why so much description about this justice and lack of injustice from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why? What's the point? Not even as much as an atom's weight. He's trying to make it so clear. Don't look around the world and think that this injustice is coming from me. See that is the layering and many people's decisions who have gone through those horrible cancers that we mentioned of the soul, of arrogance, of lying, of deceit, of cheating, of backbiting, of greed, of la la la. All of this is compounded to create what you're now facing. And hey, you may even be a part of it yourself. ظَلَمْتُ نَفْسِي. I've done it to myself. Regarding the day of Qiyamah, Surah 21, Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 47. And we place the scales of justice for the day of resurrection, so no soul will be treated unjustly at all. It's all going to be fair game. So you've got no one but yourself. You know that those lines in Munajat Amir al-Mu'mineen, which I think cite from the Quran, it's going to be that day, Malu wa la banoon. You're not going to have your family, you're not going to have your money, you're not going to have your wealth. Everyone's going to be running from one another. You're going to call out to your husband or to your father. It mentions different family members, right? Forgive me.
I have a question on that. I just recite. Even the Mu'mineen, they're going to be like that as well.
How do you mean, sorry?
Even the Mu'mineen, even the Shia are going to be like that as well, running around crazy.
I don't know. I don't know. I'd say it's... I don't... Yeah, I mean, the guess would be...
Probably.
There's a line in... which surah is it? I can't remember. It's in Quran, there's a verse that talks about... Basically, you all claim that you're a believer, but we're going to test you. So, yeah, I can have my Shi'at Ali wristband, no problem. I can do my izar at the front, no problem. I can be president of the mosque, no problem. But if I'm backbiting against them and whatever. You know, it's funny because then we all kind of say that line of hadith al-Kisar that the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib are going to be successful. Inshallah, to be a Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib, what does it take? I guarantee you it takes a lot more than just azar and so on and so on, right? And if you truly are Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib, if you are a Miqdad, if you are a Jabir, if you are a Salman, yeah, you're chilling, you're absolutely chilling, no problem, right? So if I'm not there, then I'm probably not the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib would be there. My weird quick conclusion to that. So if we are, then hopefully we won't be running. Hopefully Lady Fatima will take us with her, right? That's kind of what we would want. So we can see in the Quran that this concept of Allah's justice is repeated, and also that it's kind of like saying, don't even try and bring injustice towards me. Don't even try and put it on me. This is coming from you guys and the vices that you have that you are unable to control. And there's an invitation to justice. There's an invitation to each of us towards adalah, towards this justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Man's attributes should naturally be a reflection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes. We know this. And Allah's attributes should be felt among the members of any society that we're in. Wherever we go, we should be a beacon of calling back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Based on this principle, the Quran emphasizes both Allah's justice and justice amongst members of the human society. We need to be a representation of it. And Quran repeatedly considers injustice as the very essence of corruption in human society. It predicts a very painful fate for cruel people, in fact. And we see that there's a description of the fate of such people in the olden times, back in the day, who were destroyed due to their unjust deeds, which the Quran uses, therefore, as a warning for each of us as coming generations to say, hey, you guys need to wake up. If you're practicing injustice and cruel acts, the same way that that generation got wiped out, the same could happen to you. And we're specifically talking about Surah number 16, verse number 19. Indeed, Allah orders justice and good conduct in giving to relatives and forbids immorality and bad conduct and oppression. So if we're fulfilling any of those, will we be running? Yeah, probably. It's worth mentioning here that cruelty or injustice from others is just as bad as doing it to others. This whole concept that it's not just about who's doing it. If you're hearing it and you're doing nothing about it, well, you're in big trouble. Ghiba, backbiting. The ahadith that we have about this is that it's not just about you being the one that's saying it. If you are a listener in the conversation, you also take the burden. Ghiba is such a cancer in our communities. Wow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran likens it to eating the flesh of your own dead brother. Just grim. It's just grim. It's awful. How many communities, how many amazing people have we seen get taken down by ghiba? For what? If you're a listener in that, you too are deserving of that same punishment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 279, لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون. Neither shall you make the debtor suffer loss, nor shall you be made to suffer loss. Doesn't matter if you are the one, neither shall you make the debtor suffer loss, neither shall you be the one that's actually doing it, nor shall you be made to suffer loss. Submission to these unjust acts of cruel people is to encourage tyrants to engage in their devilish deeds even more. If you're hearing it and you're not doing anything about it, you're a contributor, because you could have stopped it. In the same way, if you see someone on the street about to get stabbed, tough one, but hopefully you're going to jump in and try and avoid it, right? Try and stop it. In the same way, if you hear someone being spoken ill about and you do nothing about it, this adal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you, encourages you. You want to manifest this fairness and this justice. Otherwise, you're like those. Very interesting point in Ziyarat Ashura, where it talks in many different points about those, the la'an, not just being on those who were in the land of Karbala fighting against Imam Hussein, but even those who were considering going, even those who made a sudden movement to even think about going, and even didn't in the end. The tafsir by Shaykh Muhammad Khalfan is incredible on this, really beautiful. You think like, why? Why is it that even if like you made a knee jerk and then you stopped and you didn't go, or you went to prepare your saddle and you missed it, why is it that you're always included? Because your heart managed to turn so much that you even considered and started moving to go and attack your imam of your time. In the same token, if I hear it's going on and I'm doing nothing about it, if I hear money's being stolen from the community, if I hear that and I'm doing nothing about it, come on. I'm lost. I'm nowhere. So this is this concept of adala. We've tried to go from first principles. We've tried to say there is a differentiation. Some believe in adala as in part of the usul, others don't. We believe that it is part of the usul, and we've said, look, if you don't believe it, why don't you believe it? And we said that they were saying, oh, we're unable to differentiate between what is right, what is good, what is fair, and what is not. And we've said, no, we are actually able to differentiate. It would be weird, astaghfirullah, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish the Prophet for doing such an amazing job. So we can differentiate between what is adil and what is not adil. We do have a limitation though. And that limitation therefore implies that there must be someone from among you that comes and encourages you towards this fairness and goodness and forbids you from that evil, and therefore that necessitates guidance. The Nubuwwah, the Anbiya, and the A'imma alayhim salam, and they help us get there. Then the question was, where does this injustice come from? Hey, don't go back and try to blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've proven that He is absolutely just, He's absolutely fair. He doesn't have the vices that creates injustice. We said the vices, pride, arrogance, power, money. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need any of this. So He has no... And again, this is a very weird concept for us to understand, because we as humans have all felt it, right? We've always wanted something from someone else. Whether we've acted on it, that's a different point. But we've always wanted it. We always have that, oh, I wish I could, I wish I could. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from that. Why? Because He's unlimited. He doesn't have this need for anything else. He's got it all. So what's His intention? Why would He want to go about being unjust? It doesn't make sense. He can give and have everything in His kitty. It's like, for example, a millionaire, if a load of kids at a Walad says, oh, give us a gift, he's like, yeah, everyone take a tenner. It's not going to affect him, right? And just keep giving because he knows he's got so much. Now imagine that's unlimited. Allah's like, yeah, just take what you want. It doesn't matter. He doesn't have the need. He doesn't have the vice of wanting to be unjust. So when we think about injustice, we need to figure out where does it come from, and its layers of bad decisions and so on and so forth. And if we're not fighting for this adala in our community, amongst our friends, amongst our family, then we are in a very tough position. Because frankly, as we said, adala is putting something in its rightful place. Dhulm is taking something away from its rightful place. Tell me, what was it from the people that killed Imam Hussaini alayhi salam? What was within them that meant that they didn't want to stop the killing of Imam Hussaini alayhi salam? What were they promised? The governorship of Ray, more wealth, more fame, more this, more that. All these very same traits that we start off with, but maybe we just start by slandering someone in the corner and stealing that guy's wallet and putting them down because we don't want them to be somewhere or whatever. Suddenly it becomes, even if it's an imam, I don't care. What's most important to me is me, is what I can get, is my vanity, is my position. This is one, taking people away from where they should be, from their rightful position. Taking money from them if it's theirs. So on and so on and so on. Taking their haqq away. So inshallah, I hope this has given like a bit of a understanding. I realize I've not delivered it in the best way, so forgive me, I'm not 100%, so forgive me if it's not been completely clear. But I hope inshallah that it's been sufficient. If there's any mistakes, please make me aware so I can correct them. But given my ill explanation today, please, I really recommend that you read the first 2 lectures on Adala by Ayatollah Nasser, and they're literally 4 or 5 pages. It's super quick, and hopefully it will debunk any mistakes. And as our dear uncle mentioned, the book by Sheikh Bahari as well, Divine Justice.
Yeah, I sent the PDF to Abbas.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you.
Perfect, that'd be great.
It's 38 pages, it's not much. 38
Easy, inshallah. Perfect. Were there any questions, any comments anyone had that they wanted to share?
I have a question from last week. What is, I forgot the definition of wahid. I can't remember the word now. But
Wahid.
Yeah.
Wahid means...
No, but there was in the sense of a person being muwahid.
Muwahid, someone who's muwahid.
Yeah.
Muwahid comes from that same root of wahida, of like singularness, if you like. Tawheed, wahida, again the same root. Wahid, the number 1, same root, wahida. So someone who is a muwahid is someone who is like a complete proclaimer and completely... So if in order to be a proclaimer, you need to fully understand and be engrossed in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, Mawla al-Muwahideen the master of those who are the muwahhids is Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's someone that completely gets it, teaches it, professes it, lives it. He's completely dissolved in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's oneness.
So like, I feel like there are times, especially like, I'll feel that something like I've done is not fair, like what's happening to me isn't fair. And in those moments I feel like it's very difficult for me to see, there's justice going on. So what can I do in those moments where I feel like, I can't see anything else other than what's happening to me is simply not fair. I've done everything in my power. So what can I do to remember this justice of Allah in those moments?
Do you mean like practically, like for example, an exam's not gone well?
As in like I could be trying and like putting 100% effort into something, it's just not working. I could be praying for something, it's just not working, and then how is it like remembering the justice in those scenarios?
It's a really good question. The cop-out question is go back to remembering that Allah is the most just and work away from there, so don't try and blame Allah. I think we have a very big tendency to blame Allah whenever something's going wrong, right? And and it's crazy how even in English the phrase, oh for God's sake, is so perfectly used, or imperfectly used I should say, but so perfect for this example, right? I'm trying not to say go back to first principles, but honestly I've not seen a better way than to start from first principles, right? If you put it, okay, let's try and be practical and still allude to first principles, right? You're in a scenario. Let me take an example, right? You've got a salary. You know you need an extra salary for your remortgage to be successful, right? And that's something that many of us will face in life. You go and interview at 4, 5, 6, 10, 15, 20, however many different places, right? And you get to the final round each time, and each time it's, oh, sorry, this little thing, oh, this little thing, and you're like, okay, well, this is unfair, right? At some point, some person says, this is unfair. We need to go and define fairness. What is our What is fairness? What has Allah given you that would illustrate His fairness upon you? The fact that you still have a brain to think is pretty fair of Allah. He didn't need to give you that. The fact that Allah has given you another heartbeat to engage your brain and to gauge your next breath so that you can actually think, that's pretty fair of Him as well. The fact that He's given you a house, the warmth, the shelter, to even think about this very concept is a massive, massive bit of fairness. So you start to add all of these different mercies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, all of these different ni'mah, and you'll be there all day. Someone who is engrossed in contentment won't have time to blame Allah, won't have time to say, oh, this is unfair. Because there's too many fair things for them to see. So it depends what's salient to you, right? The classic example that's used in philosophy is, if I ask you all to look up, and if I give you a sheet and say, write down everyone what you think you saw, I'd say 95% of you would say, I saw the roof, right? Or I saw the projector, or I saw something physically here. And if I said to you, no, I saw the sky, you'd be like, how? You'd be like, well, to me, I know above that is a sky. I know there's something beyond that. It depends what is salient to me. It depends what I see. If you take a child to a supermarket, right? And you say to a child, what did you see? Like, oh, I saw the sweets aisle. You take an adult and they're like, I saw the prices. I saw that onions went up from 65p to 72. It depends what you see. It depends what is salient to you. It depends what is aware. You're both in the same dimension. It just depends what you see, right? Amir al-Mu'mineen has a beautiful line where it's reported to say, contentment is the capital which will never diminish. You may have seen it on my wall in the kitchen where you sat, right? We live by this. Contentment is the capital which will never diminish. No one can take away contentment from you. It will never vest, right? It will always be vesting, if you like, you want to see it that way. It will always be increasing in value. And when you're someone who is so engrossed in what Allah has given you, you don't have time to see what He hasn't given you, or you don't even let your brain start to think there. So then this concept of, oh, it's not fair, like, look at the deal I've got, man. I'm sorted, I'm chilling. There's some, if I'm not mistaken, some mufassirin that say, for example, in that line of Surah Al-Fatiha, the ni'mah and amta alayhim, this ni'mah on you, is the greatest ni'mah, and that greatest ni'mah is wilayah. So you could be dying on the side of the streets, but if you have wilayah, what more do you want? And all of a sudden, the job, the remortgage, the whatever, it just looks petty suddenly. So that's what I'm saying. It kind of alludes back to first principles, but practically, yeah? Go.
If injustice comes from the traits that we have, like selfish, greed, why has Allah given us these traits?
Beautiful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. That we have tried you. I think you were there for this lecture in Sayyid Zainab alayhi salam's wilada, right? That we've given you these ordeals. And we're going to test you with good and bad. We're going to test you to see how well you do, basically. Either we could have gone through this life and it just be like, yeah, everyone's happy, all great. That's inshallah what heaven's going to look like. But we need to go for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's adala, His justice, to be like, how have you fared? Let's see how you've got, let's see how you've done. Some of us, and this is part of the journey, that we need our brain, our intellect, to conquer our feelings, our emotions. Everyone feels anger. Everyone feels upset. Everyone feels jealousy. Everyone feels all of these different vices. Those who are successful, those who are muflihun, are the ones who conquer it. And those who conquer it have passed the test. And those who pass the test will get the divine just reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now you could ask then, like, well, why do you need to create the game in the first place, God? And that's a different discussion, right? Why don't you just jump to the end? That's a different thing.
Are there any other definitions for justice?
Well, I'm sure there must be somewhere.
Islamic definition.
I'm sure there must be. I'm sure, at least in their wording. But these are the two that Ayatul Nasr gives, the ones that we've mentioned today. But I'm sure there must be. Again,
The first brother Sadiq said is that's from Imam Ali alayhi salam is saying, like, put the plate, anything in its right place.
In its
That is
right
from
place,
Imam
yeah.
Ali alayhi salam, so.
I'm sure Shaheed Mutahari will explain justice and define it in a slightly different way, but similar, right? It's very interesting because in Arabic you have these dictionaries, and I was speaking to my teacher last night actually. I went to see him for the first time since COVID for 2 years, and he loves tafsir, like he's addicted to it, right? So I was going to say an unhealthy addiction, it's definitely healthy, right? He's very healthily addicted to tafsir. And the part he loves is the technicalities on how words are made up in Arabic, because once you get to the root and you see what it's associated with, you start to get a completely different understanding of the word. And if the number, it was a very late conversation last night, I think he said there's 16 dictionaries that they are using as part of this tafsir project that he's working on. And he said even some of them will take us in different directions in terms of the tafsir of the word. So I'm sure there's different ways to define adala and how it's broken up and the technicality. It's super interesting. And then one practical example, when we say taqwa, when we say, oh, that's God-wariness, or that's piety, he usually cringes greatly and is like, you've not been listening to any of my lessons, have you? So when he talks about taqwa, he goes, where does that come from? It comes from wiqaya. Where does wiqaya come from? It comes from hifz. Hifz means to protect. So you have this soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted you, that has all this, it has the potential to do everything, this soul that Allah gives you. Otherwise it would be unfair if He starts everyone from a different level, right? So you have to protect it. The more you protect it, the more you keep it pure, the more you see that soul, that a baby comes and you give a baby a leaf and they're fascinated by this leaf for 1 hour. But you give me a leaf and I'm like, what is this? Right? The more you keep that soul as pure as that, where they're addicted to their mother, because at that age, that's all they know, that's what's keeping them alive. Why don't I have that same addiction to my Lord when I know, Allah's keeping me alive even more so than that? If I have that pure soul and I protect it for my life, then I'm going to fly. But when I backbite, I get a layer. When I lie, I get a layer. When I miss salah, I get a layer. When I look where I shouldn't look, I get a layer. When I wear what I shouldn't wear, I get a layer. So on and so on and so on. All of a sudden, I corrupt this soul. So this protection of the soul is knowing this is taqwa. This is where you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is seeing. And you also know that you need to protect it. And therefore, that drives you to make godly decisions. And that is how they typically describe taqwa. So you can see from God-wariness and piety, which piety we should just think is the old man with grey beard and saying thank you and alhamdulillah, to now actively protecting the soul is a different thing. Yes, sorry.
So I have a two-part question.
Sure.
You mentioned that injustice is what we do, it's due to our consequences. And I understand conditions like war is consequences of decisions that humans make. But what about conditions like world hunger or innocent children dying, or people getting diseases like cancer, which is incurable? So on a large scale, is that also consequences of human action? And the second, shall I wait?
No, go for it.
Okay, the second part of my question is, you mentioned
Allah's adala is Him giving a plant the water, the soil, and the correct temperature. What is the adala in terms of the plants that don't? For example, in countries that don't have soil, don't have water, and have extremely high temperatures, the sub-Saharan desert, for instance, the agriculture fails. And don't get me wrong, I believe in His justice and that He is fair. What is that in terms of adala then?
I think it's very similar to the sister's question earlier on, right? And it's like, where does evil come from? And it's a really, really powerful question. What I don't want to do is give it a quick answer, because Ayatollah Sayyid Father Milani spends a good amount of time in it in his book or in his lecture, and I think he covers it really aptly, actually. So maybe, given that it's come up twice, and it's quite an important question, I think, especially given how much corruption and stuff we see in the world and difficulties we see in the world and so on, it'd be nice maybe, perhaps even next week, we could do the session specifically on that. So we'll take a break from Ayatollah Nasser's work maybe for 1 week, if everyone agrees, and we can prepare specifically from Sayyid Father Milani's work. Would that be okay? Yeah? Inshallah, perfect. That means you have to come next week. That's the only downside. So it depends if you're getting ready for New Year, and all those exciting New Year celebrations, New Year, new me, all that good stuff. Anyone else for anything? No, inshallah. As I said, I've not been in my best form today, so please forgive me. There's a very high chance I've probably made mistakes along the way. So if you do notice any, please let me know. Please forgive me, and I need to rectify them. My disclaimer would be, please read the book. It's 4 or 5 pages, extended reading. I'll work from Shahim al-Tahari, but please try and read it just in case I have made any mistakes. It's a very difficult topic to try and explain, so I'm nervous that I have made a few mistakes. So please do check it. Don't listen to anything that I said. Go read it, and then you can make your own inferences from it. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين. اللهم صل
Thank you, Brother Sadiq, for another well-informative session. Inshallah, we'll have next week's session on the 30th of December, same time. But now we'll have Ahmed Raza recite ziyarat for us, so salawat.
Allah.
Allah.